Today's text comes from 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And this week is a kind of a continuation of last week when we were talking about Elijah, the prophet whose time was not as long as we feel it should have been or it was when we remember back in the scriptures, but also someone who was very powerful and who is still remembered not only in Judaism, but also in Christianity and even in Islam. So his power and his impact was huge. And so here we see in today's text, we see his time was coming to an end. His time of going with the Lord was at hand, and he was trying to figure out what to do. And as we come to this text, we see that his fellow prophet, his inheritor, the person who's to take over after him, Elisha, is with him as they're walking down this trail. They're walking a journey going from city to city, and also Elijah is trying to push him aside or leave him behind so that Elijah can go do what needs to be done. And we see here that he says to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." And Elisha responds, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they traveled together and went down to Bethel. And as they were going, there was a company of prophets who said to Elisha, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And Elisha says to them, "Yes, I know. Now keep silent." And then as they get to the next place, as they get to Bethel, Elijah says to Elisha, "Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But Elisha responds, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they traveled together down into Jericho. And as they were traveling, another company of prophets came to him and said to Elisha, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And Elisha's response is, "Yes, I know. Please be silent." Then they get to Jericho, and as once again happens, Elijah says to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But Elisha responds once again, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." And so they continued on, and they continued forward. And this time there was another company of prophets that came, but they stood at a distance, for they knew that the time of Elijah was at hand. And so Elijah asked Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" And Elisha says, "Please let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." And so Elijah responds, "You have asked a very hard thing. Yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted. If not, it will not." So they continued to walk together when suddenly a chariot of fire came from the sky, and the horses and the chariot separated them both. And Elijah was taken up in a tornado of whatever was going on, this fire, this chariot, these horses. And Elisha stayed and watched as his master, as his teacher, as his prophet was taken up into heaven. And he cries out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces as he wept and mourned the loss of his teacher, of his father, of his prophet. This is the story of today's text. And what a text it is, isn't it? It is a text that has fascinated us for millennia. It is a text that has helped us to be encouraged. It is a text that has encouraged us to wait for soon and someday the prophet will return. We see it in the Gospels when they ask John the Baptist, "Are you Elijah?" We see it in Revelation when the prophet comes. We see it a few times when people are asking and waiting for the prophet to return. Elijah, who was taken, should come back one day. It is that we encourage, it is he that we see and he that we know that affected the entire Old Testament and New Testament. That's why when we talked about last week that Elijah is only in 8 chapters of 1st and 2nd Kings, it is a surprise because of his impact, because of how much he did, because of how powerful he was. And part of this and part of today's sermon is to think about this. Sometimes we think it is about quantity of time. It seems like we have to spend a lot of time with someone in order to affect them. It feels like we have to spend a countless amount of hours instructing and being with. But yet, just as Elijah teaches us, it is not about the quantity, it is about the quality. For in our lives, we have stories of people who came in and were there for just a short time, but yet they helped us to turn the corner, to move on to where it is that God was calling us, to be and to become the people who God has called us to be. I call those people, in a lot of senses, angels on our road. Angels are not necessarily people or things with wings that come down from heaven and are full of glory and you can't look at them directly. Angels are people who come onto our path and help us for a time and move on to the next. Yet their impact is felt with us forever. I've had a few of those, and I've shared this story once before, I believe. When I was in about 11th grade, it was my most difficult year in high school. I was on the verge of dropping out or failing most of my classes, and yet, for the first time in my high school career, from kindergarten all the way through middle school, I was having speech and language classes because I couldn't say the SH or the CH. And 9 years of classes and being with someone to help me still didn't help me to speak properly. Yet in my 11th year, through high school, I had no speech and language. They forgot about me. I was a product of the system that got left behind until someone happened to come across my file and they looked at it and read it. And this lady, whom I do not remember her name, I don't remember what she looks like, but every Tuesday at lunch, I was in the office with her, and she helped me to be able to say the SH and the CH. I couldn't say she, so we used to go through tongue twisters like she sells seashells by the seashore, which I couldn't say. But she helped me to say and to speak and to be able to stand up in front of people, which was something that I didn't dare do before because of my inability to say these sounds. I can't remember who she is, and I would love to one day go into my Board of Ed file and figure out who she is, just so I can say thank you. For the year that she was with me and I was with her, she helped me to be here today, because it was that little thing that helped me to be able to speak in public, to be able to not be ashamed to speak to others, that brought me to where I am today. 11th grade, if you would have left me at 16-year-old, I would have dropped out of school, been working a minimum wage job, and just been living life as difficult as I could have. Here I am, 20 plus years later, I'm able to stand up and to speak and to be the person that God has called me to, because of this angel that came onto my path. See, too often we're waiting for the chariot of fire to come down. Too often we're waiting for an angel with wings whose face shines with glory, and yet we miss the angels that God puts on our paths because we're waiting for them to look a certain way, to be a certain way. We want their grandeur to be seen and felt, but yet God places people in our paths to be there alongside us. Maybe not for years and forever, but for a time, so that they can help us to see what we need to see at that moment in time, so that they can help us to open our eyes to what's going on at that moment in time, so that they can help us to speak properly, so that they can help us because the next steps to come are what's needed. This is what's needed now for the next steps to come. Instead of waiting for the chariot of fire, sometimes we just have to look at those around us. How are they affecting our lives? How are they encouraging us and helping us? Who is the angel that has been placed on my path? Likewise, there are those who shouldn't be there anymore. Likewise, there are those who God needs to remove, but we keep holding on to. Likewise, there are those whom we need to leave behind as we walk forward, and yet we hold on to them. What happens if Elijah decides not to let go of Elisha and he decides to continue to hold on to him? Does he go off? Does Elisha become the prophet that he becomes if Elijah continues to hold on to him? I think too often we hold on to things because we're afraid to let go, but yet it's affecting both you and whoever the other person may be. Are you preventing your blessing from coming because you're holding on to something too hard? Are you preventing that person's blessing from coming because you're holding on to them too hard? Is it time to let go of certain things, of certain people, so that you each can go into and become the people of God that God is calling you to be? It's a difficult situation, isn't it? Elisha becomes a great prophet in his own right because Elijah is taken. If Elijah remains, then Elisha never becomes the prophet that he becomes. It is Elisha that anoints the kings that are to come. It is Elisha who does the healing of Naaman, the Aramean. It is Elisha who does a lot just like Elijah did, and actually a lot more. Elisha is as big a blessing as Elijah because Elijah was willing to let go. Because Elisha was willing to let go. It was the quality of time that they spent together, not the quantity. And that's a difficult thing. It's difficult because we don't like to let go of things. If something is good, we want to hold on to it forever. If something has been good to us at one time, we think it will once again be good for us and to us. But yet, if I, as a 16-year-old, were remained with this teacher for another few years, would the blessing have been as great as it was? It was because she was there for that time. Because she was there for that moment. Because she helped me to speak and to be and to become the person that God has called me to be, that it was such a blessing. When we hold on too long, it makes it more difficult because the work continues. When we think about our lives, when we think about a church, when we think about all the things that need to be done, the work continues. And if we are being held back, if we are being restrained, if we're not being allowed to be creative and to do what needs to be done, do we benefit the others? If we as a church here are stuck in what we used to be, if we as a people are stuck in what used to be good and how great it used to be, how do we bless those who are here in our present? How do we move forward and bless those in our future? When you're driving down the street, when you're driving in your car, the windshield is a lot bigger than the rear view mirror. And that's intentional. Because what's behind you might just need a look or two to make sure you've passed it. But you have to look through the windshield. I hope that no one here drives looking backwards. I hope that no one here just looks back and then drives forward. I hope that when we're driving in our cars, we actually just look at the rear view for a moment to see what we've passed, to see where we've passed by, to see that the car is cleared. But we look through the windshield so that we can continue to move forward. That's the way we need to be in our lives as individuals, in our lives as a church, in our life as the church. Looking through the windshield, seeing where we're going, focused on what needs to be done to get to where we're going. Looking back just to confirm that we've gone past it. Celebrating the things that we've done, yes, but not getting stuck there and allowing it to hold us back. It's time to look through our windshields in our life. It's time to live life looking forward at what's to come, at where we're going, at what we're hoping to do, rather than looking at the rear view or looking back, because you cannot move forward. You cannot be the blessing that God is calling you to be. You cannot be the person that God is calling you to be if you're stuck looking at what was, hoping that things can become once again what they were. Because the truth of the matter is, it will never be what it once was. But that doesn't mean it can't be better. It means that what used to be was great for that time. But it doesn't mean that we have to continue to be what we were today. For God is calling us individually to be better people, to be better Christians, to live out the gospel in our everyday life. God is calling us as a church to be the people of God that we are called to be, to bless others, to encourage others, to be the light in this dark world. God is calling the church to live out the gospel message in a very real and tangible way, to look forward, to strengthen those around us, to be light, to be strength, to be hope in a hopeless world. But it means that we have to let go of what was in order to become who it is that God is calling us to, and how difficult that is. I know. I know it is difficult. But Elijah was willing to let go. He actually tried to let Elijah go earlier. But Elisha held on, knowing that when the time was right, he would be left behind. And his teacher, his father, his prophet would go off. And he knew that he would have to take over for him. And he knew that when the time came, he would be ready. Are you ready? Are you ready to live the life that God is calling you to live? Are you ready to accept the call that God is calling you to? Are you willing to live out this life in a way that stops looking back at what was, but starts looking at the present and seeing what is, and looking forward with hope at what could be? Are you ready and willing to accept this call, as Elisha did? And Elisha went on to bless many, and to strengthen many, and to provide hope for many. Even for us today, more than 2,000 years later, Elisha still brings us hope and encouragement. It wasn't the amount of time, because he also was only in about 8 or 9 chapters of the Old Testament. Elijah and Elisha are examples of quality rather than quantity. Are you willing to live out a quality life? Are you willing to not worry about the quantity of time, but to worry about the quality of effort and strength? The quality of hope that you bring, the quality of encouragement that you live out, the quality of the gospel that your life speaks to others. Are you willing to live out a quality life rather than worrying about the quantity and the time?